Hello, everyone. I think we may start now. I am glad and honored to welcome you at the second plenary session of the 2021 EUA CDE annual meeting. The topic of this session is the role of academic freedom for early career researchers. I will present you briefly the scenario of our session. First, I will introduce the three speakers in our session, and I will invite them to deliver their statement. Then I will ask some targeted questions to each of the to each speaker, and in the end you will have the opportunity to address questions yourself. For this, please use the Q&A tab, the one with the question mark in the left side of the screen. Well, so our three speakers are Astrid Söderberg-Widing. She is the chair of the board in the Association of Swedish Higher Education Institutions, vice president of Magna Carta Observatory, and president of Stockholm University in Sweden. She also holds a PhD in cinema studies from Stockholm University. She was appointed professor of cinema studies in 2000 and has been president of the Stockholm University since February 2013. This is a reminder to address your question in the Q&A tab. Professor Söderberg-Widing is a fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, the Royal Swedish Academy of Letters, History and Antiquities, and of the Academia Europaea. She is chair of the Association of Swedish Higher Education Institutions, and in this capacity a member of the EUA Council. She is also a member of the EUA Research Policy Working Group. Professor Söderberg-Widing is chair of the BIBSAM consortium, responsible for the Swedish negotiations with scientific publishers, as well as vice president of the governing council of the Magna Carta Observatory and president of the board of Aarhus University. Our second speaker is Susan Wright. She is professor of educational anthropology and co-director of the Center for Higher Education Futures at the Danish School of Education, Aarhus University. She studies people's participation in large-scale processes of transformation, working with concepts of audit culture, of governance, contestation, and the anthropology of policy. She has researched university reforms for over 30 years in the UK and Denmark. She coordinated the EU ITN project on universities in the knowledge economy, UNIC, in Europe and the Asia-Pacific Rim. Informing Professor Wright's work are insights gained from studies of political transformation in Iran before and after the Islamic Revolution. She co-edits the journal Latis, Learning and Teaching, International Journal of Higher Education and Social Sciences, and the book series Higher Education in Critical Perspective, Practices and Policies with Bergen. Her most recent book is Enacting the Danish University Reform in an Ethnographic Perspective, Springer 2020. Our third speaker is Agnieszka Zira. She is president of the board of European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers, Eurodoc. Previously, she held positions as Eurodoc Secretary, Eurodoc Workshop Officer, and Eurodoc Open Science Ambassador. She was Vice President of the Polish National Association of Doctoral Candidates, KRD, in 2018, and subsequently the KRD Plenipotentiary for International Cooperation 1 year after. Agnieszka Zira is a doctoral candidate and assistant lecturer at the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering at the Krakow University of Technology. Zira's scientific research focuses on unconventional machining methods. Electrodischarge machining process is the topic of her dissertation. Now, as I have mentioned, I will invite the three speakers to deliver their initial statements. And I will start with Astrid by addressing a general question. What are the characteristics of academic freedom in the case of ECRs, which means doctoral candidates and postdoctoral researchers? And why is this topic more relevant for the ECRs than for other categories of researchers? Please, Professor Reading.
Thank you, and many thanks for the invitation to speak on this important occasion on the role of academic freedom for early career researchers. I would say that academic freedom is indeed a fundamental value for all universities across the globe, and together with institutional autonomy, it also constitutes the base for the original Magna Carta Universitatum document from 1988, first signed on the occasion of the 900th anniversary of the University of Bologna, which has now been followed up by an additional statement from 2020 in order to resonate more with contemporary challenges and concerns, and by emphasizing the global nature of universities' endeavors, as well as their societal responsibilities. A couple of years ago, Stockholm University took part in the Magna Carta Observatory pilot on living values. The idea with this project, which has now become a kind of toolbox available for all on the MCO website, was to put these fundamental values into practice within our universities through thorough discussions with both professors and students across the whole university. Without a culture actually promoting academic freedom, official declarations are indeed worthless. To implement the fundamental values, such as intellectual and moral autonomy, is a precondition for any university, but the values also have to be recognized by governments and by society at large. The Living Values Project convinced me of the great potential in actively addressing these core questions for any academic institution in order to face challenges with lucidity, to be proactive in actually implementing the values, and to develop an institutional culture to promote academic freedom for the benefit of the university as a whole. Moreover, I would argue that the implementation of the core value of academic freedom is particularly important to emphasize for early career researchers. Doctoral students and postdocs are particularly vulnerable when there are general societal or institutional threats to academic freedom. Their dependence on senior scholars, as well as on the overarching system governing and providing funding to their university, may risk to negatively affect their rights to independently choosing research questions and to pursue their own seeking for scientific answers to be able to address pressing societal challenges. This fundamental right may be threatened in several ways. The very legitimate reason of wanting to prioritize research, which may solve acute societal challenges, is one. Here, both funding streams and institutional priorities might lead to steering away from fundamental research with no foreseeable application. And this will not only affect academic freedom for the individual researcher, but also risk to undermine the breadth of basic research and thus its possible applications for the future. Also, the temptation to offer a doctoral student or a postdoc a certain project well defined in advance might lead to limiting their actual potential as researchers and the field they might be capable of exploring, and thus also to circumvent important research questions that need to be addressed. In Sweden, the research bill from 2020 proposed that academic freedom should be included in the Higher Education Act, which was later also decided by the Parliament. However, there were limits. In an addendum, it was specified that this academic freedom should be subordinated to the so-called public service ethos, common to all state authorities. This led to a huge debate in the press on the role of academic freedom specifically in relation to other societal values. But the fundamental question of the possible implications for young researchers was totally left out from the debate, hence the importance of today's discussions. I'm convinced that it is only through keeping these fundamental values actively alive within our institutions and our societies, where they are now threatened in many ways in several countries, that we will be able to offer our early career researchers, who actually have the capacity to realize our greatest potential as universities, the possibility to freely pursue their quest for scientific truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this meeting. And I would like to approach the question by drawing on three research projects over recent years that I've been involved with. The first one is the UNIQUE project, which was a European Union FP7 IT, an initial training network project, where we had 20 PhD students and PhD candidates and postdocs. And the aims were both to research the changing roles of universities in the global knowledge economy and also to train a networked group of critical researchers to be future research leaders. And that included thinking about how to develop doctoral education. So we ran a series of workshops which included reflexively analysing the candidates' own doctoral education conditions and the way they would like them to develop in future. And the blue thing on this slide sets out that we asked all the candidates to fill in information about academic freedom in their own country and their own institution. And we identified some similarities, but look at the differences. They're quite amazing. Not every country has the idea of academic freedom. For example, Denmark only talks about research freedom. Other countries talk about research freedom, teaching freedom, and the ability to critique society and your own institution. In Spain and Italy, that's part of their constitution, but in Denmark, it's in the law and very limited. And we found that it was very confusing, especially for doctoral students and postdocs, when they moved country and came into a different country with a different research culture than the one they were used to. We set up this discussion, and the part in red on that slide shows the main points that came out of that. First of all, the candidates felt very strongly that public funding covers their research, and therefore exercising academic freedom is a social responsibility to fulfill the social purpose of the university. They thought of it more as a duty rather than a right. But secondly, it was very clear that academic freedom is not well defined, and it's not the same everywhere. And the third point they made was that it has to be practiced. It's not just a value, it has to be put into practice. And for early stage researchers to practice it, it requires bravery, especially when you're in a precarious employment position. And it also requires the support of your academic community. So this discussion raised the very important question: how do PhD candidates and early stage researchers acquire the confidence and courage and learn how to exercise academic freedom? The second project that we've conducted recently was one on practicing integrity, and there's a booklet that's freely available as a result. We looked at the Danish Code of Conduct on research integrity and how it's translated into universities and into PhD courses. And some of those courses just focused on research integrity, but many of them also drew on research freedom and ethics and put the three topics together. Following the courses, we followed some of the PhD candidates that had been on the courses to find out what they thought they'd learned from the course and how they practice what they'd learned in their research environment. They said that they had found very clearly that the courses taught them to be reflexive about their own research practice because they were individually responsible for compliance with the requirements of research integrity, although many felt those requirements were unclear, and that caused a lot of stress. And also that they were individually responsible for protecting their own research freedom. But they also found that they were experiencing contradictory pressures. Some research groups practice questionable research practices as part of their research culture. And the PhD candidates found themselves at the bottom of a research hierarchy where they were unable to question those questionable research practices. But at the same time, they also found that institutional incentives set them on a course that was contradictory with exercising their freedom and implementing research integrity practices. So the pressure to get external funding, to get whatever was the fashionable thing or the available funding on a particular topic, to get results out as quickly as possible, salami slice them if necessary, get your name onto publications wherever you can, publish or perish in the top ranked journals and build up your CV. Those pressures to try and get an academic job and to try and meet the incentive structures of the university often ran contrary to their exercise of academic freedom. And the last point we found was that the PhD candidates felt very unsupported. There were no forums that we could find for PhD candidates after the end of the course to follow up and discuss how to act in particular situations. They discussed this during the course, but after the course, where could they go to discuss with each other and with some advisors how to act in particular situations? Often those situations concerned their own supervisor or their research director. And how could they work out collectively how to negotiate tensions between being good researchers and positioning themselves in this competitive system? So this research identified a lot of pressures. The third research is currently going on, and that refers to a series of very serious scandals in Denmark in recent years, where these in particular refer to contracts for external funding, where the researchers have been pushed by external or even internal stakeholders to come up with certain findings. And there's been undue influence exercised on the results. There's a list here of them, and I won't go into detail now, but you can find them in the newspapers quite easily. So they have been going on from 2016, even earlier, through to the present. But more recently, in 2021, there's been a series of very serious attacks on academics, run by politicians and one or two academics themselves, attacking whole areas of research: gender studies, post-colonialism, ethnic and integration studies, to mention the main ones. They've been called excessive activism, politics dressed as science, and pseudoscience. And politicians have also been, in the Danish term, hanging out name individuals, including PhD students, in the media and in Parliament, misrepresenting their research and repeating these misrepresentations even when they'd been put right. And then in Parliament recently, they passed a declaration which was signed by a majority of MPs, including the Minister for Higher Education and Research, to express distrust in the universities and in the ability of the universities' leaders to protect academic freedom against what they're calling pseudoscience. And the politicians have responded to academics' complaints about this by saying that academics should welcome attention and should stand up to the criticism. But then there's a question how. The university leaders have been trying to make reasoned arguments in the media explaining and defending the university's academic freedom, but then they've fallen into the problem of how to do this without giving more oxygen to the people making the complaints themselves. There was a petition signed by many, many academics asking the minister to withdraw her support for the declaration, but that disappeared without trace. And the PhD students who've been attacked in Parliament, some of them have written ripostes in the social media and in the Researchers magazine, and there's an extract from one in this slide. But there's an enormous power difference between an MP speaking from the Speaker's stool in Parliament, naming a PhD student and trying to shame them, and the PhD student trying to defend herself in the Researchers magazine. So why is there this problem about trying to defend academic freedom? And I refer back to the 2003 university law, which made the universities into self-owning institutions in a world where all actors compete in pursuit of their own interests. And universities then are made open to the demands for research and teaching from all the interests that politicians, public authorities, industry, etc., in surrounding society. And universities are to negotiate those demands and agree them in contracts. And the university is, in the words of the law, to defend and uphold both scientific ethics and the freedom of research of the individual researcher as well as the university as a whole. In other words, the university is to defend itself. Nobody else is going to defend the university. So who is this university? Well, in terms of the law, the university is the governing body, the governing board, and the governing board delegates its tasks of defending academic freedom to its appointed leaders. So what procedures do they have? And this is ongoing research, but when the reforms were first brought in 2003, we asked all the boards whether they were going to write a statute on protecting research freedom. And the answer was no, because they wanted to keep things simple. And Heine Andersen has done research in his book, Research Freedom, where he asked all the 8 universities in Denmark whether they had a clear definition of research freedom. And the answer was no, 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 no. And whether they had written policies for how to protect academic freedom. And the answers were no, 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 no. So just recently, there's a scramble to try and produce policies and procedures to protect academic freedom, but then more to protect the university and the leaders from attacks on the reputation and brand of the university. They don't really show how an early stage researcher can turn for protection when they're criticised by MPs in the media or Parliament. And also the 2003 law removed the elected senates from the universities. And we now have academic councils, usually at faculty level. And we've been trying to bring the academic councils together into discussion with each other. They're all very concerned about the attacks on academic freedom, but they're totally fragmented. So trying to get a discussion between the academic councils within each university and across the universities. They had wider remits offered by the 2011 university law, but usually these haven't been implemented by the universities. And I think that is the forum that really could be used to look at the contracts in a collegial way to ensure that the university is protecting academic freedom, and also to provide support for individuals under attack. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and that is a great honor for me to have an opportunity to speak on behalf of the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. Eurodoc wants to highlight that academic freedom can be attacked in many different ways. As Eurodoc, basing on our internal discussions within our national associations, we tried to highlight some levels of understanding of academic freedom. That is why we highlighted 3, or in fact 4 levels, which I wanted to talk about. First level is researcher understood as a person. The second, independence of research from government and political bodies. And third one, the societal recognition of and status. The first level generally means that the researcher should be given a total freedom to formulate the research questions, to choose the method which use within the scope, of course, of the ethics and integrity. Then should be also free to choose how to present the results, including the tools using. Especially we are talking about all the tools such as open science, which we really advocate for. And the next thing is free of fear or any kind of repercussions, and that should be understood really broaden, because we can mention here the physical violence, psychological violence, but also expulsion from academia, mobbing and isolation reduces access to the funds, and of course other necessary tools which should be used by the researchers. What is more, also provided at the institutional level with all the needed support to compensate for existing vulnerabilities and that reduce the access to all mentioned before points. So we want also to cover here all the disabilities and of course the gender gap. The second level which we will talk about is independence of research from government and political bodies. Still some problem with changing slide, sorry. But I will keep talking and maybe it will work in a second. Okay, so the second level is independence from research from government and political bodies. And here we need to ensure that research performing organizations and research funding organizations are independent from the government, meaning that, for example, also the choice of study and research program should be not forced by government through administrative, economic and other measures. Of course, we are aware of the fact that there is a need to monitor how the labor market looks like, but we need to have the chance to choose what we want to study, what we want to learn. That is why we really need to have the opportunity to choose our field of research. The next thing is the approachment to the assessment, which cannot be only but must be devised on specific disciplines, because each discipline really differs. So we should take into account also all the vulnerabilities and existence of the above mentioned necessary support, which I mentioned on the earlier on the slide. Also, the assessment should take into account the interdisciplinarity and be able to evenly assess interdisciplinarity works. What is more, it is really important to highlight that funding should be based not on performance, but in a redistributive way. We are meaning that not only the really big universities or research organizations should have funds, but also the smaller ones are really really good ones and should also have access to the fundings. The level 3, which we highlighted, is societal recognition and status. What we mean here? Basically, we want that academic freedom also can be covertly restrained by fostering among public opinion a distorted perception of research and researchers. And especially early career researchers really often see this problem especially when beginning their careers. This can really affect academic freedom in two ways. First of all, is justifying in front of public opinion the restrictive measures mentioned on the previous slides. So reducing researchers' freedom and introducing administrative and economic measures that impede full academic freedom. The second thing is implicitly forcing researchers and especially early career researchers out of academia and research as a profession due to the reduction of their self-esteem as professionals, their perception and of their own social status and the rule, and overall reduction of their serenity in performing research. Among these, we really need to highlight that the problem is not to be recognized as specialists. We really often see this problem. What is more, not to be recognized the societal rule of research and of researchers that produce research results which may lead to underestimate the impact of each researcher makes in their everyday work. The third thing is to be perceived by public opinion as privileged group while we are really hardworking, but it is not seen. A solution which we can highlight here is to try to encourage and researchers to be active citizens, so to show their results, to try to cooperate with other institutions and be able to bring research-based perspective in public debate and also social-oriented activities also outside of the field of research. So try to be more seen in the society. The next level, which may not directly be a matter of academic freedom, but we believe that it is needed to guarantee academic freedom, are the working conditions of early career researchers. First of all, it is needed to have a stable contract, to have full social benefits like other workers, and also to reduce dependence of the researchers from the project for funding method while increasing their autonomy in using public funding. It is also all this is a fundamental requirement for a greater academic freedom, which we understand as academic freedom. As I said, all these points were found out by our national associations, and that's all. Sorry for some technical issues. Don't know why it occurred, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Agnieszka. I hope you can hear me.
Can?
I will start now with the targeted questions, and
Okay.
I will start by addressing the first question to Astrid. All the questions will be connected to some topics you have addressed in your statements, although we would like to find out more about them. So, Astrid, you have talked about the role of the academic freedom. But what can a university actually do to protect academic freedom?
I think this is a constant struggle that we have to undertake, and I think it's really a question of university leadership at all levels within the university, both departments, faculties, and also the presidency. Because what you need to do, I think, is actively fostering an institutional culture with academic freedom at its heart. We all know that culture eats strategy for breakfast, so it is not about having nice strategies or policies in place, but about really actively put the value of academic freedom into practice. And also this, I think, is emphasized by the Magna Carta Observatory 2020, the Magna Carta Universitatum 2020, which emphasizes that the pursuit of academic freedom is a value in itself. Attaining such a value in practice is indeed a constant quest. You can never check the box and say, now we have academic freedom. You always have to work on it. And then I think that it is particularly good to focus on early career researchers, because if academic freedom is in place for them, it is most likely that it is in place more generally within our universities. And a very good way to start, which I discovered in our work with the Living Values project at my university, it is by starting to reflect on these issues, because most scholars, they have so much to do in their everyday work, and also the students and so on, so they don't have time. Often they don't have time to really reflect on these core values, and that is something, that is a way of getting acquainted with the concepts and then to reflect on how we actually put them into practice. I think that was an eye-opener for many.
Okay, thank you, Astrid. My second question is for Susan. Susan, you have mentioned a series of factors that affect academic freedom. Is the collaborative research one of them? I mean, to what extent the research collaboration is an obstacle, or it can be stimulative for the academic freedom, especially in the case of ECRs?
Yeah, I think collaborative research is incredibly important for the university and for early stage researchers as for senior researchers. That is not the problem in itself. I think the problem is the design of collaborative research, and especially the contracts that are entered into. And many of the scandals that have been happening in Denmark in the last few years have been because the university has signed contracts which have literally put a muzzle on the researchers, whether they be early researchers or senior professors. So one, for example, they did research on the pollution from agriculture and the effect it was having on water. The ministry wanted to be able to loosen the controls on agricultural pollution, so they changed the results. And then the researchers couldn't respond because they'd been, in the contract it said they could not talk about their results in public, or even talk about the fact they had a contract in public. Now, to me, that is the university denying its own academic freedom, both for itself and for its individual researchers. So I think it's really, really crucial that early stage researchers are given the opportunity and given the training to really think carefully about the wording of contracts and what should be in a contract to protect your academic freedom: the ownership of the results, the ability to disseminate the results in public, the ability to publish where, when, and where you like, although there are some patent issues on that. But these things need to be very, very carefully discussed at all levels in the university. And in particular, I think it's the early stage researchers that are not given the opportunity to really know what they should look out for in a contract. If the contracts are good, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with, and in fact, it's an enormous advantage to do collaborative research, because it's a way that the university and the individual researchers are fulfilling their social responsibilities towards society. So there's nothing wrong with collaborative research. It's the way it's organized, and in particular the contracts.
Thank you, Susan. Agnieszka, I think we can all agree that the condition of being an ECR involves numerous risks, from scientific and ideological risk to career risk, and even to physical risk. However, what ways would you suggest for the universities to support the ECRs at risk?
Yeah, the problem of ECRs are at risk is really broadened, because we can, as you said, concern it in the way of, for example, foreigners coming to our countries and doing their research. And of course, it is really crucial that university supports such foreigners, showing and organizing some kind of courses, instructions. What are, let's say, the red lines which cannot be crossed in particular country, especially covering really ethical themes or political one. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when we are going abroad, and our I would say now the governmental institutions should support this kind of researchers and give information to the university about the risk. For example, what are these red lines in other countries? And of course, there is also a risk within countries. So we think as Eurodoc that there should be also some independent institutions which can be a kind of indicator between the university and the government, the authorities, which we can report any problems which occurs at the university in any kind of academic freedom, which we have any problem of academic freedom. And I think that are the basic ideas.
Thank you, Agnieszka. As you have seen, I didn't make any comments or remarks on the statements you have delivered. And I didn't do it because I was hoping to have more time for the questions submitted by the audience. I'm glad to see that we have a few questions. I will start with the only one who has an approval alike. And I will address this question to Susan. So, can you comment on the roles of supervisors and what can be done to strengthen their role in strengthening academic freedom vis-a-vis PhD candidates or doctoral students? Doctoral candidates. Sorry, please.
Yes, I think the supervisor obviously has a crucial role here. When we did our unique project, we very clearly emphasized to all of the supervisors that part of the research training for an early stage researcher was to think about the conditions for freedom of research in their country and in their institution. And it was interesting that even some of the supervisors didn't know the actual legal and situation in their countries. So really knowing what it is, and also then how to support students. Obviously, when students have come under attack, PhD candidates or early stage researchers have come under attack in Denmark, their first port of call has been to their supervisor, and that is incredibly important. But also the supervisors need support, because how the supervisors then mobilize the university to support these attacked students, I think that's lacking at the moment. It's a gap in the processes. And I also think that the ways in which either by getting supervisors together or getting candidates together across faculties to really think about the ways that they need support to protect their academic freedom. As the students on our unique project said, you have to be courageous to exercise academic freedom, and that bravery has to be supported and has to be trained. So the role of the supervisor, but beyond the supervisor, also the role of the faculty leadership in PhD support is crucially important to explain to the students what their rights and what they should expect and what support they can get.
Thank you, Susan. You also have a sort of mirrored question, and I will ask this. I'm going to address this to Astrid. How can we protect the academic freedom of doctoral candidates when his or her supervisor disagrees, e.g., which methods to use or where to publish results?
I think this has to do with the kind of institutional culture that I talked about previously. That I think that we really need to have in place structures that support doctoral candidates as regardless of who is their supervisor, because it may always happen in a relationship which is also a power relationship between the doctoral candidate and the supervisor, that there are disagreements. And then you need to have a structure in place where the doctoral candidate knows whom to address, to whom go and complain. I know some of our departments, for example, have worked with mentor systems, which actually is quite a good way to do it, because then it's not complaining to the head of department or something. That might be a huge step, but that there is somebody designated with the task of actually helping the doctoral student out in such cases. So I think that's extremely important. That's our responsibility as university leadership, to see to that the doctoral student is never left alone, so to speak, with the supervisor.
Thank you, Astrid. Now I have a question specifically directed toward Agnieszka. How can we support early career researchers so that they will end up being seen as experts by a broad audience? What kind of training or support should we offer?
Okay, unfortunately, this problem occurs still in a few countries. I know that it may be quite obvious, but first thing which we should, as doctoral candidates and junior researchers, do to be seen as professionals is to change our let's say the names which we use. We should everywhere use doctoral candidate instead of student, PhD student. That is the first thing which we need to bring to the public debate, that people will see that we are doctoral candidates, so we are more professionals. The second thing is unfortunately changing the approach of the government and all the institutions within the countries. I know that it is still a problem, especially in Eastern European countries. because we are still unfortunately treated like a students. And if we will really try to show that we are professionals and we'll also bring our knowledge to the society, as I said during the presentation. So, for example, try to use our knowledge and our research and try to make it more open, and all the time underline that we are doctoral candidates working on some really important research which can be addressed to direct problems in the society.
Thank you. Well, it seems these were all the questions we had. I would have been glad to have more, but let's see if others will appear by the end. Perhaps I will address them too. Now, I would dare to make a few concluding thoughts based on our discussions today. The notion of an early career researcher is a very complex one, not only in its meaning, but also in terminology. And I think Agnieszka pointed out very well why some phrases are preferable, for instance. Then I think we can all agree about the need of institutional and also cultural mechanisms for supporting early career researchers. Of course, our systems and universities offer a series of measures in order to help them, but I think that the most important thing is that the establishment of an organizational culture in order to help the researchers. And finally, all the speakers have highlighted the many risks that involve the PhD candidates, which is, I guess, the most fragile stage of a career. Now, fortunately, we have one last question, and I will address it to all of our speakers. In the what order you prefer to answer it. So often, doctoral candidates are incorporated in research projects granted by governments. Governments set specific research priorities for grants. Therefore, how this really limits research freedom? I think is a very adequate question for our session. Perhaps Susan, would you like to answer?
So this is talking about when
just short answer.
When the government is funding a research project, including positions for PhD candidates, and whether that's restricting their research freedom. That's the question, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that comes also back to the question of the art of supervision. There's an art to fulfilling the requirements of external contracts and yet ensuring that the candidate has the space to develop the research around their own interests. And it's a difficult thing to achieve, but it really becomes a very important responsibility for the principal investigators of that kind of project. You've obviously got an obligation to the government, but you've also got an obligation to the early stage researchers to enable them to develop their own ideas and their own skills and abilities in the direction that they feel is appropriate. And that balancing act is incredibly difficult, but it is very, very important.
Thank you. Astrid?
Yes, of course, in a certain sense, every research question posed by anybody who's not the researcher, which is often then governments, is of course, in a certain sense, might be limiting academic freedom. But I very much agree with Sue that the supervisor has a huge responsibility of letting the doctoral candidate address the research questions in his or her way, and in that sense, pursue them in a free way, even though the question in this case is given. I think that it would be absurd to claim academic freedom to an extent that we would never accept research issues which are, for example, meant to solve wicked problems. We will always need to do such research, and if the government wouldn't impose them on us, we would most certainly develop them ourselves, because as researchers we know the needs of society. But I think there is a huge responsibility here, letting within this given frame, letting the young researcher actually do her own research.
Thank you. Agnieszka?
I totally agree with Susan and Astrid, but I wanted also to point that, as I said, the government can't limit the exact themes of projects to, let's say, really important because of the market. Also, other disciplines, other projects are really important because of the society development. And we need to remember that all the projects should be interdisciplinary, because we need many kind of experts inside, and we need different knowledge to have really good projects. So it shouldn't be limited because of the one specific topic, which is really important for, as I said, for the market. We need to give opportunity to address projects to particular disciplines, also to not only to engineering, but also to the social science, because it is as important as engineering.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Susan, Astrid, and Agnieszka, our speakers today. Thank you to the audience too. Before closing our session, just two thoughts. So there is a short break there, which will be followed by a carousel discussion where participants can network. And I advise you to exit the room by clicking the leave button in the top right corner of your screen. You will exit the room and go to the lobby. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.